Hey everyone, welcome to Up to Speed. For today's episode, we're inviting you into a conversation. Andrew Kamika on the communications team sat down with 3 leaders to talk about their experience as Black men. They shared their thoughts on work, society, fatherhood, and more. Now, this conversation runs a bit longer than our Up to Speed episodes tend to, so if you're not able to watch all at once, we've got you covered. The video is available on demand on BZ Web and inside Verizon, and it's available as a podcast as well. Check out uptospeedpodcast.com. With that, I will turn it over to Andrew.
For V-teamers across the globe, the last few months have been challenging, and they've only intensified in recent weeks as protests and calls for the advancement of racial justice have increased. We're in some challenging times, and this has led to difficult conversations, but they're very necessary conversations as we try to make sense of where we are and figure out how we move forward together. So with that said, I'd like to welcome 3 V-teamers who are here to share their story and what they've experienced recently. I'm joined by Shay Phillip, a leader in our network and technology team, David Hubbard, a leader on our legal and public policy team, and Kwame Trotman, a leader in Verizon Consumer Group. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. On Monday, June 1st, Verizon reaffirmed its commitment to racial justice, donating $10 million to organizations that fight for that cause. It was an emotional day for a lot of people, myself included, on June 1st. And to be honest, June 8th wasn't that much easier. So I'm curious to know from all of you, what's been your coping strategy for the past couple of weeks?
Personally, I've spent a lot of time in self-reflection, not just in these past 2 weeks, but really through the corona pandemic and the COVID pandemic that we've had. It's afforded us time to slow down a bit and pay a little more attention and watch what's going on in ourselves, but also watch what's going on in the world. That self-reflection has been really important way to cope, including spending time meditating and really thinking about things. And then over the past 2 weeks, in light of the racial injustice that we've seen come to light in really powerful ways, I've spent a lot of time connecting with family and friends, having great conversations with colleagues, and it's all been sort of food for the soul in many ways for me, and I know I'm not alone, for us all, to be having somewhat uncomfortable conversations, but for us, many people sort of awakening to realities that we've known for the bulk of our lives.
So for me, it's been a 2-week time frame of reflecting, as David talked about, but also education. I would think that sometimes when we work at the pace that we usually work in, and we have a tendency to overlook as far as what is happening around us. And it allowed for me these past couple weeks to go back and just reconfirm and re-educate myself as far as the many examples of injustice that has transpired within just the past couple years.
Have you had any conversations with colleagues or like friends discovering this for the first time, or is it a situation where people didn't understand it or they didn't realize the scale? What's been your experience in that?
Yeah, so Andrew, I'll share with you. First, I'll just give you an example as far as just in the community that I live. And I live in a predominantly, white community. And it's one where, as a Black professional, there's certain barometers of success. And usually what guides you to where you want to live, and especially if you have children, is really putting your children in the best opportunity to get the best schools and the best education. Okay. And I remember having a dialogue with my next door neighbor who are white, and their children and my children are best of friends. They sleep over, and we had an opportunity to really unpack the situation that transpired with George Floyd, for example. And one of the questions that they asked is like, Kwame, do you think that if you were there, would you have tried to engage, especially when you see that the police officer had George down? And I said, I don't know exactly what do you mean. How would I want to engage? They said, well, if you see something like happening, why wouldn't you get in the middle of it, or just tell the police officer, hey, this is what you're doing is wrong. She said, if I was there, I would jump in. I would have bit the police officer. I would have done something. And I had to explain to her. I said, her name is Natalie. I said, Natalie, let me explain to you exactly why I wouldn't take that stance. because I automatically would be another threat to that police officer, and I'm outnumbered. And although I'm thinking I'm coming from a place of logic, that's not exactly how I would be betrayed. I would be portrayed as a threat to the police officer, and I probably would have been in the same situation as Mr. Floyd or been worse. So it's an opportunity for us to educate, a lot of our colleagues, to have that open dialogue and explain to them different scenarios and different situations and how the same rules do not apply to us. And before, I'm not particularly sure if they would have felt comfortable in asking and us engaging in that level of dialogue. But quite honestly, it's been pretty fruitful these past couple of weeks because everybody is showing their level of vulnerability. They're showing their openness to want to understand. And quite frankly, they're wanting to make a change alongside of you. So, like I said, it just supports the previous statement that I said before. Is pretty encouraging.
Okay, thank you. Shay, I'd like to pose the same question to you. Like, what's been your experience in the past couple of weeks?
Thanks, Andrew, for having me, and it's always a pleasure to talk with Kwame and David. David and I spoke for about an hour last week just on this topic. But look, I think, what happened to Mr. Floyd was tragic, right? I think what it has done is really made everybody think about what's happening to the Black community. And when you think about how long 8 minutes and 46 seconds is, and you try to sit down in a chair and don't do anything, it's quite long, and you get antsy. So to echo what both of these gentlemen spoke about, I think what Verizon did and what Hans did and the authenticity that he had on stage was awesome. And it created the platform for us to have this dialogue today, right? And we've been coping with this. And you asked, well, how have we coped in the last 2 weeks? African Americans, Blacks have been coping with this for many, many years. It's not just 2 weeks. And it's hard. What we've seen throughout the years and how you communicate with your kids and what's going on and how you educate them, right? I remember the minute I was able to step out of the house by myself, my dad educated me on what to do and what not to do. And I've then transferred that to my son. But the VLC, just going back to the original question, has given us the stage and a platform where we can freely articulate this and have the conversation. Because if you think about a few years ago, you couldn't talk about this in the corporate world. You may have a water cooler conversation, but you couldn't talk about it. And if you spoke about it, either there was, penalties behind it, or people would frown upon the conversation. But now I've received so many phone calls from my colleagues and my friends and just saying, how are you doing? What do you think? How do you feel? What are you going to do? So to answer your question, I think the pandemic really made it easier because I think we all, to David's point, everything slowed down and you were with your loved ones at home looking at what was unfolding and you were able to have that dialogue because before you would hear it in the news while you were at work. So you couldn't step back and reflect and say, okay, wow, this is crazy. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Come on. Uncalled for, unjust, injustice, right, is being done. So I just appreciate what the entire VLC team has done to give us all V-teamers that stage to have this dialogue because I think it's important. Nikki spent an hour and 20 minutes of her staff meeting discussing this. I spoke for an hour and 20 minutes in my staff meeting, or maybe a little longer, with my team, where I think it was not just about what happened, but what we're going to do moving forward. So I really, really appreciate the company and what they did with the 10 million.
You brought up a good point. You said when the first time you were able to leave your house, your father kind of explained to you how you had to act. What was it like that first time you heard and realized like the rules were different for you because you were a young black man in the United States?
I can't remember a time where I wasn't aware that my race was different than many of the people I was interacting with. Meaning, as a young kid, I grew up in an area where most of my neighbors were actually black, but I was bused to predominantly white schools. I had the talk, and people say the talk. I had hundreds, thousands of talks with my family about how I behaved, how I would be viewed, the way I would represent myself. And I have now had the same conversations ongoingly with my own kids. And I have two 14-year-old boys. And the injustice that people are waking up to and the racism that we have in America and the prejudices and biases that black people have dealt with and experienced for as long as we've been here are not new to us. Meaning, I really can't think. And it's funny, as you asked the question, I was thinking, well, when was not? I've always felt a pride. And some people would consider it hey, we have an extra burden. Well, I've had a pride, in being a black man and representing the culture in a way that counteracted the biases that many people had before I ever walked in the door. And it's unfortunate that they have them. It's unfortunate they would have views about us before they met us. But the experiences that we've all shared, whether it's walking into a classroom and having people look twice because you're the only one that looked like you in the classroom, whether it's I had teachers say the course again, like, hey, this is, are you sure you're supposed to be in this course room, sir? And I see people smile because we've all had those same experiences. Forget about the number of times we've been stopped by police for driving and had, hey, well, there was a description on our car that fit yours, or hey, there was music, or hey, can we just check your license and registration, or hey, you've been profiled and stopped so many times that it has become the norm for many of us, an unfortunate norm, but the norm. And so the calls and conversations we've had with colleagues, we were all outraged and infuriated with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Eric Garner. You can name them all. We've all been infuriated. But one thing I was not was surprised. I was not surprised. And that's very unfortunate. And many people were, but many black people were not. That's sad.
Yeah. Hey, David, if I can interject and just state a point. Andrew, you asked the question, when did you know? And it was interesting because I remember at 17 years old, I enlisted to go into the United States Marine Corps. And when you go into the military, you're taught racism doesn't exist. Matter of fact, they coined you as either a light Marine or a dark Marine because it's more or less the brotherhood and the sisterhood that you have while you are serving your country for civil liberties that makes America as great as it is today. However, what is a disappointment is that when you're out of uniform, those same civil liberties don't transfer over. And I remember a situation where we were actually leaving our base and going out on leave, and I was advised by one of my superior officers to say, it would probably be in your best interest that you carry your military ID right above your driver's license in case you do get stopped by the authorities. So that can be an indicator that you won't pose a threat. So here I am. I'm okay to fight for my country, but yet different rules have to apply when I'm out and I'm wearing my civilian attire. So you just think about that as a at the young 17, 18-year-old, and then now you have to use that as a foundational period as you then, you grow into your professional career. So this is where it doesn't connect. And this is where, we've always found ways to cope. And Shay talked about it, that this is a battle that we have been having because it's part of our playbook. But yet we accept it.
And, we often talk about bringing our authentic selves to work. You mentioned you're a veteran, you served your country. Do you think that there's a different set of rules that apply to Black men or Black people in general when they enter in corporate America?
I think there's certain biases that comes along with everything. So you're taught to keep your head held high. You're taught to, walk with a certain stature. If you are a big person or a person of higher stature, that can definitely be a problematic. That can definitely pose a threat, if you will. I believe that there's a certain way that you engage, with your colleagues, where you don't want to be very threatening. You may feel very passionate about a specific topic or discussion, but you have to really be very aware and self-aware as far as your tonality, because obviously you don't want it to be misrepresented. So I do believe that there's certain set of maneuvering that happens within a corporate America setting, and it's a different dialogue that even if I'm mentoring, young Black professionals, I have to now use those certain examples as far as you want to make sure that you are crystal clear as far as, your ability to land your point. However, you want to do it in a way where it's almost towing the line where, you want to be extremely non-threatening as far as in your delivery. It's one that, I think all these gentlemen could attest to.
There's a saying in corporate America, don't be the angry Black man. And I think a lot of people have heard that. And I think that's what Kwame is talking about. You can say something one way as an African American, and the same can be said another way. And we feel threatened. I mean, they feel threatened by what you say. And I think it just goes back into how society looks at us, right? Over the years. So it's a bias. It's an unwritten bias. And I think that's why you have all these training around to make sure that you educate your workforce to have unconscious biases, right? To make sure that they're aware of it. But I do think it exists in corporate America in certain ways. So
I couldn't agree more. And corporate America is a microcosm of America. And so we don't stand apart from the experiences of Blacks in corporate America, of Blacks who are not in corporate America. And I think that's a surprise to many people. In fact, we were having conversations amongst our teams and with a group of Black lawyers in the department. And one of the conversations that has been a shock for many of our colleagues as we had discussions is like, oh, wait, that applies to you too? Those are your experiences too? Well, you're educated. Well, you've got a law degree. You've got a master's. You've got all these things. So we didn't really think that was your experience too. The reality is all of the issues and biases and injustices, unfortunately, and inequalities that play out in the criminal justice system, that play out in education, that play out in the healthcare system, also play out in corporate America. And so as we're talking about how we feel walking into, meetings and trying to be non-threatening and not coming across as the angry Black man, it goes back to the narrative that has been out there for society about who Black people are. And it's a folklore, it's a myth that Black people are any more angry than anybody else. But that's one that we actually have trained ourselves to keep in the back of our minds when we're in meetings and discussions and going to interviews and, you name it. It plays a role into our thought processes.
And just look at it, right? You have in the Fortune 500, how African American CEOs are there? I think it's four.
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 Yeah.
Just four.
Four. And we're like 3% when it comes to senior executives. So absolutely, with the talent that, exists, there's still such low numbers, right? And it's not just African American men, it's women and so on and so forth. But, so there's absolutely a corporate issue.
Yeah. I think it could be summarized that, if anything, we coined the word resiliency. That's what we know how to do extremely well.
But I will say this is a moment for us. This is an opportunity. This is a blessing. And I know sometimes it feels heavy for us all. But the reality is people are collectively waking up. There's a collective consciousness shift that we are all experiencing throughout this country and actually throughout the globe. And we can't miss the opportunity. We can't waste the experience. And I'd like to say no experience is wasted if you use it wisely. And I say this to my kids all the time as we make mistakes in sports and other things, right? It's no different for us in our everyday lives. When people are acting with compassion and with love and with empathy, then we make better decisions. And that's leadership. That's how we manage our teams, but that's how we interact every day. And part of the problem that we've had in American society is we've often missed that moral center. So we're having a moral moment. We've got a collective opportunity individually to look at each other and look at ourselves and be better, and collectively. And I think, I feel like there's the winds of change. I think we all feel the winds of change. But what will happen if we're having this conversation 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and have missed the moment?
Verizon donated $10 million to fight for racial justice. And the Wall Street Journal recently wrote that donations are not the end of the conversation. So I want to ask you what role you think we should play in shaping this movement and shaping the change that we want to affect in the world.
So many times when these incidents happen, we get energized for a day or two or three and it's news, and then we go back to our everyday life and we forget it. But what I think you've heard from my colleagues and what Wendy's speech last week when she was on the panel, you've got to get out there. You've got to stay connected. You've got to make sure you vote. You've got to go down to the municipality level, and the $10 million is great to the Wall Street Journal's point, but it's got to be more than that. How do you go in and audit, right? Ask the questions from a corporate level. How are you leveraging my dollars to constitute change? Where is it going? How are you bring in the NAACP into Verizon and have conversations at the leadership meetings, at the employee level meetings, so that they know what they're doing? Encourage, people to sign up for these organizations and so on and so forth. But the narrative must continue. This cannot be news for 9 days, 2 weeks, and just be hidden. We've got to continue to have that dialogue.
And therein lies the test, to Shay's point. Therein lies our test. If we let this go and the news cycle changes and we're no longer having courageous conversations next month, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 5 years, etc., we will have missed this movement and this opportunity. I think hearkening back to what we've all been experiencing with COVID, it's forced this self-change upon us. But I was having some conversations with some neighbors, and we all feel it. There's this desire to go back to the way things were. There's this desire to find normalcy and bring, man, I missed the office. Man, I missed, the way it was when we were able to just walk outside easy and walk the streets and do different things and eat in restaurants and the like. And I think we all do. But for Black people in America, and I say this quite clearly, a return to normalcy is not necessarily good. It's not good. So after this moment, we don't want normalcy. we want continued, sustained change. And so I want us to resist the temptation to let the moment go, and let's embrace the winds of change and actually work together to create it. We have to create the change. But I think that's our test.
If you don't mind, the last question I want to ask you guys is sort of personal in nature. Because you mentioned in some ways you were talking with your kids about this and the younger generation of your families. And the reason why I ask is because my fiance and I, we're discussing when we're going to start our family. And to be honest with you, the thought of bringing a black child into the world right now sort of terrifies me. And it's something I've thought about a lot recently, not just with COVID and the issues of the past couple of weeks and unrest. It's something that's sort of affected me for a while. And in recent times, I've been getting less sleep, and I had imagined that it would be so much worse for me if I had to think about my child walking outside the door, unprotected by me, with my skin tone, and what kind of challenges he or she may face. So I'm kind of searching for signs of optimism, and if any of you have any to share, I would greatly welcome that right now.
Hey Andrew, let me I'll comment first, because I think for all of these men, and I know them personally as fathers, the greatest joy is fatherhood. I mean, it really is. And there's nothing that I would ever trade into the world. I think one of the things that you will know from when your child is born, there's certain instincts that kicks in automatically. It's not something that you find yourself having to search in research books. You can model other different, people. It's something that just happens. It's that paternal instinct that just kicks in right away. And what happens is that you automatically are going to be a protector. You're going to be a nurturer. You're going to be an educator, of your child. There are certain things that I feel very comfortable knowing that I fully prepared my children to face adversity, to be good, prominent people, and with a good heart. And I also recognize that they have to play certain roles in life. They got to be defensive, but they also got to pick their points to be offensive. And for my son, for example, and Andrew, by no way, form, or fashion is this going to be a deterrent. It's just something that you just have to be cognizant of. My son is about to be 14. He has auditory processing disorder. So what happens is that we have to do role play at home. Because if he encounters a situation with a police officer, he has to now state up front to the police officer that, sir, ma'am, I have an auditory processing disorder. If you ask me time, I need time to process the questions that you're asking me. But I promise you, I am not a threat. I am not resisting your requests. But I'm just wanting you to know exactly how we need to engage in a conversation. That's education, but that's also progress, because there's nothing for me that makes me work harder than knowing that I have that next generation that I have a hand in developing. At the end, when you get older and you sit back in your chair and you kind of look and just kind of do a good summarization as far as what you've been able to accomplish, they're representative of your legacy. And that in itself is probably the best feeling that you could possibly have in the world. So I just feel that, look, you should never feel that there's any deterrent, that should guide you from not wanting to move forward with starting your family. And by the way, America is the best country ever. I think that sometimes I don't want the narrative to feel like, we're not a superpower, because we really are. It's just that we have to make sure that we are not allowing ourselves to take steps backwards, but just continue to move forward in progression. So that's what you do.
Wow, I completely agree. Creating life, Andrew, is so precious, man. And, I wouldn't leverage what has happened over the hundreds of years, to deter you from that, because it's awesome. with each generation, and I spoke about this previously, I think there's an improvement. And we've seen it, I've seen it through my generation. And I think society is also changing with it, right? When you think about white America, black America, I think the minority is now the majority, so people of brown skin, I think, is the majority in the United States of America. Now, whether or not, we will surpass some of these racial injustices, in the next 10, 20, 30, or even in my lifetime, I still think there's a lot of improvement to do. But I think we're making strides. And I think, again, what you've seen in the past few weeks is people are fed up. So I would say, have your kid, enjoy life, teach him or her, because with every generation, I think you'll see some improvement. And I'm seeing it in the way that my son speaks now about what's happening in the world.
Yeah. I absolutely echo the sentiments of Kwame and Shay. I have twin boys that are 14 years old, and they are the pride and joy, the most important thing that I've ever done, and the most important job I have is to help prepare them to participate fully in society. And now the caution, Andrew, I would have for you is that doesn't mean it's going to be easy for you or them. It is hard, and at times it is gut-wrenching. I shared in a note that with my legal colleagues, my boys are athletes. They run every day. They want to run. While Ahmad Arbery was running, and he didn't come home. Every day my boys leave this house, and I see them leave, I get a pit in my stomach. Every day. And every day they return, I get relief. Now, that doesn't take away from the joy of parenting, but I will tell you that is a reality that many of us have, and a commonality that we share, which is, we have fear for our young black boys growing up in a society that has a narrative and has had narratives that have considered them super predators, dangers and the like. And so hopefully that all changes. I will say, I've recently summed up, at least what I'm trying to do in my life is, honoring our ancestors and serving our descendants and leaving a legacy that will last. And your children, there's a direct line, legacy, lineage to what you can tell your contribution to society. So hopefully parents now having courageous conversations about race at home who are helping to raise good people will make a better society. We all have spheres of influence where we can make a difference. And, for many people that's, hey, look, I've got millions to donate to the NAACP and to other organizations. That's really important. But for those who are struggling to find something to do, for sure, at a minimum, raise kids and children through values of love, empathy, and compassion. And if we do that, we'll be improving our society. And we all have an opportunity to do that as parents.
Thank you all for your responses, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. These are difficult conversations, but they're necessary conversations, and we encourage you to join in them. We have resources available on the web to help people facilitate that. So we thank you once again, and until next time, you're up to speed.